what does God actually sound like? For centuries, humanity has basically pictured this booming thunder from a mountaintop.
Like a voice shaking the earth demanding absolute obedience.
But according to the documents we're looking at today, the poet does not portray the divine as something that roars, but as something that stutters.
Yeah, it glitches.
It sounds suspiciously like an exasperated IT guy who is just completely exhausted from watching us repeatedly ignore the latest critical software update.
That is a great way to put it. Welcome everyone to Beyond the Words presents. Today's subject is Blue Sky Voices by Adrian Mackenzie, aka Poetic 7. We are really excited to have you with us today because this is a profound shift in how we conceptualize ultimate authority. We're looking at two exhibits today, the standard text and the MP3 file.
And the audio is where things get really weird.
The audio doesn't just read the text, it performs it. The track is built on these echoing vocal layers, sudden drop-offs, and just heavy digital artifacting.
Yeah, the medium itself essentially becomes a commentary on the message. It transforms this sort of philosophical monologue into a really frustrated attempt to breach a wall of static.
Right. And our goal today isn't just to figure out who is speaking. Obviously, it's an elusive, unseen speaker playing ping-pong with our existential dread.
Which is fun.
Always fun, but the real mystery here is mechanical. Like, why is an eternal entity choosing to address humanity in a format that feels so deeply cynical and fragmented and sarcastic?
Yeah, why is an infinite being suddenly so worried about our vanishing attention span?
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the opening line because it instantly puts you on the defensive. The divine says, "Hey humans, still creating fairy stories, I see."
It's quite the icebreaker.
It's a calculated accusation. The text goes on to claim that we build these elaborate mythologies about this entity, only to then turn around and instruct others not to believe the very myths we just invented. But I have to push back on this premise right out of the gate. If you are an eternal, omnipotent presence trying to bridge this massive cosmic gap with humanity, kicking the door down and mocking our belief systems as fairy stories feels remarkably insecure.
You think it's defensive?
Yeah, it comes across as defensive, almost petty, really, rather than divine. Like, why would an eternal being care about our localized folklore?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the entity isn't actually being insecure. It's pointing out a fundamental flaw in human cognitive architecture.
Okay, how so?
Well, we're just incapable of holding infinite concepts in our minds. So we compress them. We box the infinite into these finite, manageable narratives, fairy stories, essentially.
Oh, I see. We give it human traits.
Exactly. We give the divine a human temper, a human timeline. And when those rudimentary stories inevitably fail to match the sheer complexity of the actual universe, what do? We don't upgrade our understanding.
We just disregard the whole concept.
Right, we throw the entity out with the fairy story.
But Adrian counters that discarding them is impossible. The poem reads, "I hold the key. No matter what evidence you draw from, you've not been able to eradicate any trace of me." Yet when it comes time to provide the slam dunk evidence of this grand, undeletable presence, he offers something almost insultingly mundane.
The sky and the sun.
Yeah, quote, "The sun is yellow and the sky is still blue." Like, that's the big proof.
But that is the entire crux of their argument against human complexity. We demand these miraculous, physics-defying spectacles to prove the existence of a higher power.
Like parting the sea or something?
Exactly. We want a mountain to catch fire. But the entity is pointing out the absurdity of demanding a localized magic trick when the baseline parameters of our reality, the fact that a yellow sun sustains life under a blue sky, is a constant, unbroken miracle that we just completely take for granted.
Wow, yeah, that makes sense. And in the audio version, that tension between the mundane and the eternal is incredibly eerie.
The underlying vocal layers are wild.
They really are. Underneath the main text, there is this persistent, just ethereal repetition of, "Hey humans."
The poem reads, and this is a great quote, "How come many are falling in love with me anew, long after the memory of you?"
That's harsh.
It's a harsh reality check regarding permanence. Human memory is so transient, we forget entire empires. But this underlying code, this presence, is continually rediscovered by new generations.
Which brings us to a really severe shift in the tone of the piece, because this eternal presence doesn't just remain a detached philosophical observer, right?
No, it gets deeply personal.
Yeah, the monologue spirals into this highly emotional, almost volatile push-and-pull relationship with humanity. The speaker oscillates between radical grace and bitter cynicism.
The contrast is jarring.
It is. The poem continues, "I don't hold grudges, I forgive you, I know what love is." But before that comfort can even settle, the text immediately doubt our capacity to return the favor. Quote, "Would you forgive me if I'm sure you won't. Would you still love me if I'm sure you won't."
The entity is exposing the asymmetric nature of our relationship with the universe. We expect infinite forgiveness and unconditional love from the cosmos, but our love is deeply conditional.
Extremely conditional.
The moment our personal reality becomes uncomfortable or tragic, we instantly withdraw our affection and we just hurl blame. The speaker is acutely aware of how quickly human reverence curdles into resentment.
And he lays out that resentment meticulously. The speaker points out that they are humanity's favorite scapegoat. They quote us saying, "I'm the one that's selfish, and if I really existed, then maybe this wouldn't happen, that wouldn't happen."
It's the ultimate paradox of human coping mechanism.
The text notes that humans love to employ the phrase, "life happens," to excuse our own chaos, but when disaster strikes, that passive acceptance just vanishes.
Right, suddenly someone has to pay.
Exactly. We blame an entity that we simultaneously claim is just energy or flat out does not exist. The speaker essentially asks, how can you blame a void for not giving you your way?
What we're looking at here is a masterclass in exposing human cognitive dissonance. We require a cosmic complaint department to process our existential grief.
A cosmic complaint department. I love that.
Well, it's psychologically terrifying to accept that a tragedy is just random, meaningless chance, you know? So we construct a target. We assign blame to the very entity we claim to have outgrown. We literally demand accountability from the sky.
The concept of the mute button is central to understanding the mechanism of this entire relationship. The text explicitly states there's a point where we can't hold it together and humans put me on mute.
We just silence it.
We don't just passively ignore the existential questions, we actively suppress them. We press a button to sever the connection because the weight of the infinite is just too heavy to process alongside our daily, mundane tasks.
You know, think about how active noise cancellation technology works in modern headphones. They don't just block sound with physical padding, they actively sample the ambient noise around you and generate a sound wave with the exact inverted phase to cancel it.
Right, to create silence.
Our endless scrolling, our constant consumption of media is that inverted phase. We are emitting a constant stream of digital noise to actively neutralize the signal of the universe. The glitch in this audio is basically the sound of our noise cancellation failing for a split second.
That mechanical analogy perfectly aligns with the speaker's diagnosis of our modern condition. The entity laments that they are engaging in a one-sided conversation, talking into empty spaces, hoping that what I place between your ears hears.
They're practically begging us to listen.
They are. They recognize that the human brain, the very instrument designed to perceive this reality, is actively refusing to process the signal.
I will defend humanity here for a second, though. I mean, if the signal is too complex, too demanding, and too vast, it's a basic survival instinct to tune it out. And the speaker actually admits this. Quote, "I'm hard to compute," and they acknowledge their message is not exactly bite size. They know that we evaluate everything in 5-second increments before swiping to the next thing.
After 5 seconds, you wonder what I'm really about.
Exactly. So if an infinite being chooses a communication method that fundamentally clashes with our neurological limits, then it shares the blame for the miscommunication.
But the poet argues that our neurological limits are a self-imposed prism, and it's built on transactional values. He points out that we discount their message because we got something else from the sale. We have commodified our attention.
It is not that we lack the capacity to understand the eternal, it's that we have chosen to trade that capacity for cheap, temporary dopamine hits. We evaluate the divine using the exact same metrics we use to evaluate a targeted advertisement.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The speaker zeroes in on that exact tragedy with this incredible plea for perspective. They state, time is shorter, eternity is longer, and then they remind us that those around you are worth more than songs and pictures.
It's a direct indictment of our screens.
Yes. We are substituting actual human connection and existential reality for flattened digital representations of life.
Which brings us to the poem's reimagining of the wilderness, because historically across almost all ancient traditions, a prophetic or divine voice speaks in a literal wilderness.
A desert or a mountaintop.
A barren mountain, a place characterized by a severe absence of stimuli. You went into the wilderness because the sheer, terrifying emptiness forced you to confront the self and the divine. The silence was the medium.
But the speaker asks here, but I'm just speaking into the wilderness, right? The context has entirely flipped. The modern wilderness isn't defined by an absence of stimuli anymore.
No, it is defined by a weaponized overabundance of it.
Exactly. The poem notes earlier that there are so many choices, so many voices. We no longer wander in an empty desert. We're completely lost in a chaotic, overstimulated digital jungle.
We have crowded out the silence. The wilderness used to be the only place you could hear the eternal voice. Now, our modern wilderness of songs and pictures is the exact mechanism we use to guarantee we never have to hear it.
We weaponize the noise. That is incredibly bleak.
It really is.
And the speaker knows that mere observation won't break through our noise cancellation. They understand that modern humans only behave transactionally, which drives us to the climax of the piece, where the speaker lays out a deeply cynical view of human morality.
They assess our compliance with surgical precision. The text states, if laws are created and tied to something you want, you'll fall in line.
Ouch.
Yeah, it is a harsh indictment of transactional morality. We do not do good for the sake of goodness. We behave only if there's a carrot dangling in front of us.
Whether that carrot is social approval, financial gain, or, the promise of an afterlife.
Right.
And right after calling out our deeply selfish transactional nature, the speaker accidentally unmasks themselves. They say, some people say God is good all the time, and oh, wow, I've just blown my cover.
It is such a jarring, sarcastic way to handle the divine revelation.
So what does this all mean? Because that's where I hit a wall with the logic. How is the cover blown?
What do you mean?
Well, the speaker spent the entire first half of the monologue pointing out that the yellow sun and the blue sky are undeniable evidence of their presence. They explicitly said, I hold the key, and you cannot eradicate the trace of me. If you are the sky, you aren't in hiding. How can your cover be blown when you are literally the environment we exist inside?
Okay, I see what you're saying. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the cover isn't blown by the physical evidence of the universe. The cover is blown by the human cliché.
The divine is hiding in plain sight. The sun, the sky,
but it remains invisible to us until it is framed in our transactional bumper sticker theology. God is good all the time.
Oh, I get it now.
The speaker realizes that by using our localized reductive phrasing, they have stooped to our level of fairy stories. They have reduced the infinite to a slogan, and in doing so, revealed their identity in the only language humans actually process.
I love that. They realize they are participating in the very fairy stories they mocked at the beginning.
Exactly. And I should probably jump in here and make something super clear for the listener. In this deep dive, we are absolutely not taking a side on the religious or theological claims being made here, at all.
Right, of course.
We're just impartially analyzing this really fascinating literary and conceptual framework that the original source material has constructed. But whether you approach this text as a literal theological assertion or purely as a secular psychological thought experiment, the mirror it holds up reflects the exact same uncomfortable truth.
Yeah, because the moment the speaker realizes they have to use our cheap slogans to be understood, they experience this abrupt, incredibly vulnerable retreat.
The retreat is the most striking moment in the entire piece. They say, maybe I should shut up now. You never wanted to hear this anyway. And this line, you never wanted to hear this anyway, implies that the terrifying silence of the universe isn't because the cosmos is empty or indifferent. The silence exists because we have proven ourselves fundamentally incapable of listening.
The entity stops speaking because we wouldn't hear them over the noise of our own active cancellation anyway.
We blame them for every tragedy, we credit them for nothing, and we give them exactly 5 seconds of our attention before we click away to look at a picture of a stranger's lunch.
That's the reality of it.
It forces you to evaluate the architecture of your own attention, Are you wandering lost in the modern wilderness of your own choices and digital voices? Are you valuing the breathing, complex people around you? Or are you discounting your own reality for the artificial comfort of songs and pictures?
The text demands that we identify what exactly we are putting on mute to survive our daily routines. Are we silencing the background processes of our own existence just to make the user interface feel a little more manageable?
Which brings us full circle to the mechanical nature of this audio file. We've traced the journey of an entity that goes from mocking our myths to pointing at the sky to finally just giving up and cutting the feed.
The medium itself disrupts the distraction. The glitch forces awareness in a way a seamless narrative never could.
So as you go back to your screens, your timelines, and your endless streams of curated noise, consider the mechanics of a modern revelation.
Think about it.
If an all-knowing eternal entity actually needed to breach your defenses today in an age of infinite scrolling and weaponized overstimulation, a burning bush wouldn't register. You'd assume it was a digital projection and swipe past it.
You absolutely would.
The only way to bypass your noise cancellation, the only way to prove they are the operating system running beneath your reality might just be a subtle, sarcastic audio glitch, right when you think you're in control. Listen to the glitches!
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. Talk to us in the comments below. And as always, like, subscribe, and get notified. Join us for the next installment of Beyond the Words Presents Peace.